Hello, good morning. Welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna, episode number 178. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, and we have 4 archive centres across the Highlands of Scotland, one in Inverness, one in Fort William, one in Portree, and one in Wick. And together those make up the Highland Archive Service that look after historic documents relating to the Highlands of Scotland, both those of the Highland Council and the predecessors of the Highland Council, and also from a wide range of depositors from clubs and societies and businesses and families and estates, and all sorts of different things. I will start by saying something that I don't know if I articulate enough, which is if you want to come in and pursue any of these subjects, if you want to look at any of the documents that I talk about in Learn with Lorna, then please do come and do that in any of our archive centres. We would love to see you in person. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then that really means a lot to us, and I know that people who watch Learn with Lorna have done that, and it really is appreciated, so thank you. So thank you for joining me. Always a relief and a pleasure when I know that people are there, so thank you very much for joining me every week. This week we are looking at the subject of clubs and social spaces. And I thought I would start by kind of giving a very quick overview of how I sometimes put these episodes together, because it's a big job, obviously, as you know, to research and write and put these together. And every week there comes a moment where I suddenly see how I'm going to structure the episode, and it all kind of falls into place. And sometimes that's really obvious because the subject I'm doing, it's about a collection that has a structure already, or it's about something that has an obvious timeline. And sometimes it's something like last week, looking at coasts and lifeboats, where we can talk about an issue and then how the journey to that issue being resolved. So it's quite a different process each week in how I put it together. But sometimes I look such a big, wide subject that I need to kind of superimpose a structure on the episode and then search through collections to find things that slot in. But there's always a moment where I go, right, that's how I'm going to do it. That's how I'm going to do this episode. And this week that happened on Monday, because I had wanted to do this episode after finding out that the Wick Town and County Club was formed 100 years ago in 1924. But as I started to think about how I was going to structure the episode, I found myself listing all the different things that could be considered a social space or a social environment, and then looking at the different reasons that people might use those spaces, what they might achieve or get out of that, and the different activities they might do within those spaces. And then that was how I came to pull this episode together. So what do I mean when I talk about social spaces? I mean, and I don't know if there is official determination of that, but I mean a place where people deliberately come together to interact, to chat, to get together. And that's something that obviously we've been doing for millennia, for obvious reasons like trade, but also for kind of more basic reasons, things like laughter and music and companionship and support, comfort, education, loads of reasons that we come together as people to socialise. So where do we see that in our collections? And that's why I started by talking about how I structured this episode, because it's not as simple as looking for records of clubs or records of societies, because we find it throughout the collections. We have entire collections that focus on societies brought together in order to socialise. So things like the Northern Meeting collection, which I've done an episode on previously, so I won't talk much about that, but also in passing references within other types of collections. So we're going to start by looking at some of the places that people congregate in and why we do that. Faith or religion is often a reason for people to come together, and we see that in our collections. People not only attending those religious services, but also taking part in the social activities that often go along with being part of a church or another religious community. So we see, for instance, in our records references to picnics and outings and guilds and fundraising events. And perhaps particularly in times of conflict, where we see the church, and again other religions, but predominantly what we have are Church of Scotland records, where we find those communities providing a place of solace and comfort to troops. We find them providing tea parties and dances and fundraisers. So for many people, it's their connection to faith that provides a myriad of purposes, including a social function and a place to speak to people and meet people. A lot of people's social interactions and leisure activities come from their work, and again we see that in our collections. So for instance, at the Highland Archive Centre in Inverness, we hold the papers of the Highlands and Islands Development Board Staff Social Club. And that includes circulars, lists of members, newsletters, event information, minutes, agendas, all sorts of things. So just to give you an insight, some of you may have been involved in this, but we can see that from the late 1988 to early 1989, you had the chance to try with the Highlands and Islands Development Board Staff Social. You could try indoor bowls, the Army Assault Course at Fort George. You could go and see Marty Webb and Wayne Sleep and Daniel O'Donnell at Eden Court. You could take part in war games, sports nights, Halloween parties, Christmas parties, pub nights, dinner dances, £8.50 for the dinner dance. You could go on skiing trips to the Alps. And what's brought people together there is that shared workplace. A note though that I saw right through, didn't surprise me at all, every type of collection I looked at, is that push for people to take on roles. And any one of you who is involved in any kind of organisation, club, group, church will be more than familiar with that. The constant reference to a call for new committee members, a call for people to take on responsibilities. So here's some extracts from that Highlands and Islands Development Board social staff social club. This one, I've taken some small extracts, but I love the way it was structured. It's a year-long, laid out like a horoscope, so it's laid out with each of the star signs and the events that will take place within that month. So, Aquarius. Despite a quiet start to the year and a postman's strike on Valentine's Day, all the stars will gather on the 15th of February at the Coach House for the best day after St Valentine's Day disco you've ever been to. Although it's the month of the water carrier, a variety of other beverages will also be on tap. Tickets £1. And then Pisces. A strange, uncertain time, but be brave and you won't feel too much like a fish out of water at the ski weekend at Spey Valley on the 2nd to the 4th of March. Further details from David. Try to avoid mishaps on the Cairngorms or you may lose an opportunity to get full to the gills at the traditional Scottish ceilidh at the Coach House on the 16th of March. Aries. Now is the time to sort out romantic rivals. If you miss with the darts, you can hit out at them with the dominoes at the Darts and Dominoes night at the Rugby Clubhouse on the 4th of April. But watch out you're not one of the sore heads hiding under the Easter Bonnet Parade on the 20th of April. I just loved the way that was structured. That was great fun. But we can see that it wasn't always fun and it wasn't always easy to run. And as I say, I see this right throughout all the collections. This the issues that people face who are social secretaries. So this is again from that same collection. In December last year, you'll see they don't mince their words in this at all. In December last year, we organised one office party, one disco and one dinner dance, and we bore the various losses involved. In February, we organised a disco and a disco in March. In April, it was a ceilidh, net loss £30. Last Friday, we organised a country and western night, so good that it was advertised in the Saturday Evening Express, net loss £20. Why is it that the same persons repeatedly end up planning, arranging, selling tickets, manning doors and managing events which are poorly attended and make losses? Why is it always the same faces that appear at each event? Why do we rely on outsiders to make up the numbers? So they go on to propose, do we amalgamate with another social club? But then why would they want to amalgamate with us if people aren't taking part? Or do we just completely disband the social club, which would mean that all of those things we do end? And listen to this. If you think our policies are wrong, we want to hear from you. Derogatory criticism is always more welcome than total apathy. We don't want your thanks for our efforts, we just want your attendance. And remember, June may be your last chance. And I just thought that was such a brutal way of going, for goodness sake, please attend the social things we're trying to organise. interesting. The HIE records, which is a deposited collection we hold in Inverness, Highlands and Islands Enterprise Records, include correspondence and programmes for social events, ladies' evenings, raft races, sporting events, fundraisers and all sorts of other activities. If we look at the Rose Street Foundry AI Welders collection, then we can see invitations to suppers and social dances, social evenings for anniversaries and occasions. And social functions often appear in the records of other collections. So for instance, within the Inverness Civic Trust, the Highland Hospice Collection, the Northern Infirmary, Highland Regional Council, lots of different collections which are not specifically about socialising, but socialising plays a role within them. I've spoken before in previous episodes about Doonray and the atomic industry in the Highlands, and I'm going to take a little bit of a closer look at the Ormley Lodge Club. This is from an extract on our website that deals with socialising in the atomic area around Thurso. The rich social life of the late 1950s was developed before the 1958 opening of the official Doonray Sports and Social Club at Viewfirth House, in the Brownhill area of the Atomic Estate. The focus for much of this early activity was the UK's Atomic Energy Authority's hostel at Ormley Lodge, a private house which had been purchased and extended to accommodate 250 single employees or those awaiting housing or the arrival of their families. As a residence for a generally young, vibrant group of people keen to get involved in the social aspects of this working community, it was a natural place for the hub to develop. The Ormley Lodge Club was established in Thurso in 1955. Its object, as stated in its constitution, was to provide social amenities and to promote cultural activities and amateur sports and athletics for its members. Membership was open to residents of Ormley Lodge Hostel and all UK Atomic Energy Authority employees. Membership of Ormley Lodge was not open to those out with the Doonray workforce, but the UK Atomic Energy Authority sought to address this with the opening of the Doonray Sports and Social Club at Viewfirth House in 1958. I don't know why I always want to say Firth View and not Viewfirth. So we can see social spaces arising from faith communities, from work communities as well. And of course, that feeling of being part of something that comes from work often continues way beyond retirement, and Doonray is a great example of that. But we hold records of the UK, of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, the Highland branch, the UK, as I said, the UK Atomic Energy Authority Doonray Retirement Fellowship, and other collections that relate to social organisations for those who have retired, not just from the one profession, like those two, but things like Probus clubs, Rotary clubs, Inner Wheel, and those social organisations often have a dual purpose of creating a social space for people while also creating a space that can do some good in the world. So we often see that with these social organisations, that they are not just places for people to congregate and enjoy themselves, but also organisations that have another function, that they're trying to contribute something either to the local area or to the wider world community. So here's an extract from the history of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship that talks about why it was created and what the vision of it was. After a pilot scheme started in 1964, the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship was formally established as a charity in 1968 to provide an informal visiting service and to promote social contacts among civil service pensioners. The idea was that the fellowship, run by the pensioners themselves, would provide a wide variety of social and cultural activities. It would be a source of information and advice on problems common to those who are ageing and retired. It would provide a visiting service so that beneficiaries of the fellowship who are ill, housebound or living alone could be visited and be given the companionship, advice or information that they may need. A central provision was that the benefit would be available to all civil service pensioners, their spouses and dependents, whether or not they decided to subscribe to the fellowship or not, although it was hoped that all those who could afford to do so would become subscribers. So again, we can see that that joint aim of social activities coming together, but also there's something around supporting people who are living on their own, supporting people who are housebound. There's a different aim for the society. The Civil Service Retirement Fellowship was organised into branches, and Branch 88, based in Inverness, was intended to encompass the whole of the Scottish mainland, north and west of the Spey Valley, as well as the Northern and Western Isles, so a huge area. However, with a relatively small and scattered number of civil servants in such a widespread area, as well as a poor public transport system, it became apparent that the branch in this format couldn't meet its objectives, and it fell into abeyance. At the beginning of 1983, a more localised branch was re-established based in Elgin, and then following on from that, one opened up in Inverness. And so we see in this booklet, which talks about the history of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, the trips and excursions they undertook, but also the value of that social contribution, exactly as you're saying, Caroline, service above self, the Rotary motto, applies to that ethic, that feeling applies to a lot of these social spaces, that you're looking to support other people. In 1996, that fellowship based, the one in Inverness, became the Highland-wide branch of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship and still exists today. That aim of supporting people also existed in friendly and benevolent societies. So again that dual purpose of socialising and making a difference to society. And across our offices we have multiple references to friendly societies, from all the way from Wick and Thurso through Galsby and Och down to Arasig and Inverelert. So a lot of references to friendly societies and the differences that they could make. And friendly societies have existed for different reasons. So for instance, the Girls' Friendly Society existed to support country girls who had left home to go to work in more urban areas. Other friendly societies acted as insurance funds for members that members could pay into and then claim from in times of sickness. Some friendly societies were attached to Freemasons' lodges, others acted as social clubs. The Och Friendly Society was constituted on the 7th of March 1801, and we hold records, rules, regulations, accounts and member lists for this organisation. And those initial papers about the early years include the vision of the Och Friendly Society and some rules about the running and organisation of it. I like this. This talks about why it was set up, what was the idea behind the Och Friendly Society. Whereas the establishment of friendly societies for the purpose of raising from time to time by subscription and voluntary contribution a stock or fund for the mutual relief and maintenance of the members thereof in sickness, old age and infirmity, and for the relief of the widows and children of deceased members, is attended with very beneficial effects by promoting the happiness of individuals. So I thought that was really interesting. There's an aim there, as I say, as a sort of insurance system for people to pay in and then claim from, but to promote the happiness of individuals. What a brilliant aim for a society. It goes on to say that therefore sundry persons in and about the village of Och have formed themselves into a society for the above purpose, under the designation of the Och Friendly Society, and have established the following rules whereby their proceedings may be regulated. And the rules are really interesting, but perhaps I found this one particularly, as someone I'm still a few years off 45, but I'm aiming towards it, and this is one of their rules. The society exclude from being members thereof persons addicted to the practice of swearing and lying, gaming, picking of quarrels, raising unnecessary disputes with neighbours, and those who are under a bad character. Okay. Likewise, they do not permit members who are affected with the gravel, so I had to look that up, and apparently that's a term for kidney stones. I don't know why, because that's not contagious. The gravel, rupture, falling sickness, or any external disorder, and such persons who are above the age of 45 years. Which I thought, come on now, and I assume that's from an insurance point of view, that they're thinking they might have to pay out a lot for people over the age of 45. But just really interesting to see the aims and the considerations. They talk about how they'll pay out in support of people who are sick or destitute, but not if they have led a lewd or dissolute life, because they have brought that on themselves. Yes, exactly, Andrea. It's harsh, isn't it? 40 flipping 5. Anyway, of course, people come together in social groups around a theme as well, a shared interest. So we hold items that reference the Highland Scandinavian Association, the Highland Car Club, farmers' clubs, agricultural societies, horticultural societies, the Wick Society. We have records of football clubs, amateur dramatics associations, youth clubs, field clubs, cricket clubs, vehicle clubs, ornithological clubs, so many different things that people have a shared interest, and that's brought them together. And again, those types of clubs serve different functions. So as you can see from that list, some existed to practice hobbies together, some to socialise, to drink, to chat. Some existed for people to learn from each other. And we hold various records from debating societies, again all the way from Caithness to Lochaber. And I particularly enjoyed this extract from Wick High School Girls' Literary and Debating Society from 1923. And I should say that at the time that this is this year, they are discussing all sorts of subjects, including it is better to know something of everything than everything of something, which I would argue is kind of how I feel a lot of the time, that I know a bit about a lot of things. They are debating that Dickens is a better novelist than Scott. They are debating that the trial of Mary Queen of Scots was or was not justified. But this was the one that I particularly liked. At a meeting of the Society in the high school on the 3rd of December 1923, the President in the chair, the Secretary read the minutes of the previous meeting, which were unanimously adopted. Public business for the evening took the form of the debate that the dreamer gets more out of life than the man who acts. So, answers on a postcard. See what you think. Pop your answers in the comments to that. The dreamer gets more out of life than the man who acts. Miss Sandra Harper, in a well thought out paper for the affirmative, expressed the view that the dreamer essentially gets the most out of life, as he is not bound to reality. And to illustrate her views, she gave an example, the exquisite fragment of Kubla Khan, composed while the author was under the influence of a dream. A capable supporter for the affirmative was found in Miss Isabel Gillespie, who stated that some very great painter, or writer, or sculptor must admit sometime we are such stuff as dreams are made on. Miss Amy Wiley, leading for the negative, also dealt very adequately with her subject in a most persuasive paper. She told the well-known story of the Persian dreamer. Miss Lizzie Meiklejohn ably supported the negative and confirmed her leader's view. The debate was then declared open for discussion, in which several of the members participated. The vote was afterwards taken with the result that the negative won with a majority of 6. So, most people feeling that the dreamer does not get more out of life than the man who acts. But I just found myself going, what a really interesting thing to discuss, to think about. I always go away thinking, what is my take on that? I wonder what my answer would be to that debate. But also, that these are high school children having these conversations. Another debating society we have is the Glengarry Literary and Social Club, and in 1894 they are having a debate, is woman superior to man? They're also discussing the temperance question, and is the present government worthy of our support? Some questions don't change. I love the records of debating societies. There's something in them where people have the opportunity to learn from each other, both about the subject matter, but also the skills of how to communicate, to debate, to discuss, which I think is something that is all to the good. The more we can learn how to debate and discuss rationally, the better. So people use these clubs and these social organisations to learn from. Sometimes they're a way for people to make friends in a new area. Sometimes it's a way to get introductions. Sometimes it's an opportunity for people to progress, either at work or in society. And in Lochaber Archive Centre, we hold letters in the MacGregor papers that talk about the appointment of Mr. Merriman to the United Free Church and his request that there should be a social so that he could be introduced to the members of his congregation. But of course, people generally often get together in village halls. I haven't even gone down the route of village halls. There's so much I could have said about that. But in village halls, in pubs, in bars and cafes, just to chat, to drink, to dance, to just be with other people. And so I wanted to finish by looking at the club that started me looking at this subject at all, the Wick Town and County Club. So thank you to my colleague Anne in Nucleus for sending me over some extracts from that collection. The Town and County Club was established, as I said, in 1924 as a members-only club. Presumably, if you were over 45, you were allowed in this one. It was initially a men's-only club, so I wouldn't have got in anyway. But it did later allow women members, and we'll come back to that. It was also one of the last in the country to retain a men-only bar. The club held social events and, like many others of its type, was involved in charitable work, particularly supporting World War II war widows. The Wick Town and County Club closed in 2010 before the building was reopened the following year under different management as Harper's Bar. But I want to go back to the years that it was the Town and County Club, or the Backer, as apparently locals calls it, so Anne tells me, which I think is because it's on Back Street. So Nucleus holds 7 volumes and 6 folders of minutes, correspondence and accounts for this organisation. And you get such a lot of social history by studying the minutes of a business like this. So for instance, in the 1940s, we can see the impact of war on the community. We can see that the daily activities of the club have been impacted by the war. So aside from those issues around supporting war widows, we also see that just daily life in the club has changed. In March 1941, the club was informed that the whisky quota was being reduced and that the club would have to start using its reserves. But we can see that situation deteriorating even further in September of 1941. It was reported that 32 dozen 4 bottles of whisky had been consumed for the 4 weeks to date, and only 9.5 dozen received. 22 dozen 10 bottles had therefore come from stock, of which 16 dozen had been taken from the reserve, which left 32 dozen whisky and 2 dozen rum. The position was discussed at length, and it was agreed that as of Monday the 15th of September 1941, members would be limited to 3 nips per day, and in the event of any member giving his quota to another, drastic action would be taken. Members introducing visitors would have to supply them from their own quota. There are references throughout this collection to smoking concerts, which is not a term I had ever heard, even though when I looked it up I realised that it is still a used term. So basically concerts, musical entertainments where generally men would sit and smoke and talk about politics and things. And we can see the impact of those. We can see fundraising concerts, smoking concerts taking place throughout the years. We can also see the impact of new technology. I loved this extract. This is from 1956. With regard to the television set, it was decided that only the president, the chief steward and the assistant steward should be allowed to switch on or regulate the television set. It was agreed that it should be left to these 3 parties in order of precedence to make a decision about whether billiards should be allowed to be played during occasions when large numbers of members were watching the television set. It's just, like I say, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it's an insight into things that we take totally for granted and how those technology, the introduction of a television set into a room where billiards are being played, changes the nature of that room, and so they're discussing it. But I particularly just like only those 3 office bearers can switch on or in any way regulate the television set, and they have to do it in order of precedence. As we come to the 1960s in this collection, we start to see that the issue of women being discussed. There is a motion that appears in the minutes that the Constitution, which currently reads, "No female shall in any pretext whatever be admitted as a visitor to this club," that should be altered to say, "Lady visitors accompanied by a club member may be permitted to such part or parts of the club premises as may be specially set aside for that purpose. No lady visitor on any pretext whatever shall be admitted to the main club room." I have to say, I did sort of look at that and go, I wonder who you were letting clean your main club room for you. There was some debate about this point, with one man saying he hoped that this was sufficiently progressive to keep people happy, and another moving that no woman should be allowed at all and that rule should not be changed. And in the end of that debate, 124 members voted for the change and 41 against. And so subsequent minutes show changes that were made in the building to allow for women members. But the issue didn't go away, and in 1967 we find this entry. Mr. Mackay proposed after discussion that females should in no circumstances be allowed in the main club room. Mr. Morrison seconded. Mr. J. Sutherland, in a direct amendment to the proposal, moved that females should be allowed to serve behind the main bar. The President seconded, and on a vote being taken, 6 were for the proposal and 4 for the amendment, so they weren't allowed to serve behind the bar. But in 1968, we can see the women finding their own way in, because, as I say, in 1968, Mr. B. Munro raised the question of members' wives using the cocktail bar without an escort. It was believed that certain members were giving their wives their keys in order to obtain entrance to the club. It was agreed that members' wives should not have this facility. In conjunction with this, Mr. Lyle said that committee members ought to have some form of official recognition which could be shown if necessary. Just a really interesting set of extracts. We can find information within this collection about costs and prices, and that's what I mean when I say it's not all ground-shattering information, but it's social history. So we can see that when they opened the new cocktail bar in 1968, it was agreed that they would charge 1 pence more on half a pint of beer, 2 pence or 2 pence more on a pint of beer, and 2 pence more on all small measures of spirits and wines. So I don't know if that's more, they're charging that in the cocktail bar as opposed to in the main bar, but just an interesting entry. But speaking of prices and social activities, I was amazed to find this. 1972, the club are looking at chartering a plane. The secretary had made inquiries regarding charter flights and found that unless a charter was made to Spain or a similar destination, little or no advantage would be gained from them. The new fares to Canada and America were extremely cheap, making charters perhaps not a viable proposition on these routes. But then later on, Mr. Morrison says that a charter flight should be arranged for next August. Canada was one suggestion, and the secretary was instructed to contact other clubs with a view to filling an aircraft. It is understood that a return flight to Canada would cost around £60 per person. So there you go. So as you can see, our clubs and our social spaces serve a lot of purposes for us as people and have done throughout our history. But they can also, the records of these organisations tell us a lot about society, about technology, about prices, about attitudes, and loads of other things that reflect not only on the towns and communities that they're situated in, but also that reflect on society as a whole. So for instance, I didn't go into it, but in that Wick Town and County Club, there's also a whole discussion around whether they should open on a Sunday or not, and all the pros and cons for what possible advantages that would bring, but then the costings and the issues around opening on a Sunday. So these records tell us a lot about the society that we're living in. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope you can join me next week. Next week I'll be looking at stories about import and export, smuggling and all sorts of other things. So I hope you can join me for that one. But a reminder that this episode and this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we really appreciate that. Thanks, Jen, for catching up with us from your holiday in Japan. I must really make a list of all the places that people, all the countries that people have watched Learn with Lorna. I think the only continent that we don't have viewers on is Antarctica. So if anyone's going to Antarctica, please watch an episode and let me know. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you all next week.